Welcome back to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. Remember to hit go live this week. Katie is still off hunting down unicorn tears, or I'm not sure what crazy things are going on there. But this week we are going to finish up the fourth part in our series on launching a podcast. This week we're going to talk about podcast marketing metrics, analytics, and figuring out whether anything worked or not. So, John, to start off, when you're looking at measuring a podcast, what is it that you want to see?
Yeah, for us, the big thing is I want to hear from the sponsors that they got, 10 leads a month and one or two of them closed every month. Like that's the metric that I want to hear from the sponsors. And then really just social chatter from the listeners. If we're seeing the show shared and people saying, hey, this was a great interview, that's great. And then just raw stats, how many downloads of the episode did we get and were we able to push it? Pretty much I try to have some kind of campaign going every week so that we can experiment and see what works and what doesn't work.
Gotcha. A lot of podcast metrics and analytics are contingent on your goals, right? So what is the goal? If the goal of the podcast is brand awareness, then you need to obviously have it be measuring for that. If it's to create leads, you want to measure that. If it is to earn sponsors. So how do you do the attribution, John, when someone, when you look at something like Marketing Over Coffee, obviously we have the revenue we collect from sponsors, but do you measure the podcast effectiveness on whether the sponsor got any love or on the number of inquiries you get from new sponsors?
Yeah, inquiries from new sponsors is good at really kind of measuring what's the health of the industry and what are marketing budgets like. Because like we saw a complete nuclear meltdown, back in Q3 of last year when MarTech just kind of completely took a hosing. And things have actually improved a lot. This quarter is probably one of the best quarters we've had in about a year and a half. So that's working fine, but that's definitely, not affected by the show really much at all. The good thing is tracking show notes links and having the newsletter and having the sponsors have trackable links. So that's usually every month I want to go back and look and say, okay, we did serve up, 30 to 250 clicks to a sponsor. And that's really all we can do. I mean, at the end of the day, it's, we can get our eyeballs to go check out your offer. Whether or not they bought, your new razor, that's a whole nother question that we can't really affect that much. But at least if we can give you the traffic that you weren't able to get any other way, that's, we're delivering some value.
Gotcha. So when we think about your podcast, this is a sort of a basket or a collection of the different metrics and data that's available to you. Obviously, with the podcast itself, we have the basic analytics, the number of downloads you have. If you use RSS feeds, the number of subscribers you have on the feed itself. Also, number of subscribers within all the different podcasting apps, because they do have individual apps have the ability to tell you like how many people are following you on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If you are, as we talked about previous weeks, using YouTube to distribute your show, which you absolutely should be, then you have the entire suite of YouTube analytics as well. Like I said, you have the feed, you have ratings and reviews, the number of people who are leaving ratings and reviews for your podcast itself, and of course, all the other video analytics as well. If you think of this almost as a funnel of sorts, then the next stage is brand awareness for the show. The number of people who are searching for your podcast by name. So going into something like Google Search Console and saying, how many people searched for Marketing Over Coffee this week, this month, this year, as a good metric. The number of people who subscribe and follow you on social media. How many Twitter followers or LinkedIn followers and things like that. And what I think is really useful as a measure of your show is the number of inbound pitches you get for people who want to be guests on your podcast.
Oh, don't tell me that I need to get more. This has been a spectacularly bad week too. We've had some real winners this week, but I unfortunately some even unsafe for work, which that doesn't happen to. Usually they're just terrible and awful, but offensive is like the next level.
It is, but in terms of awareness of your brand, of your podcast, right? If you're not getting spammed by other people who want to be on your show, then your show really doesn't have that level of brand awareness.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
So let's dig into the podcast analytics first. There's a very good chance that your show will be is hosted on some kind of platform. We talked about platforms last week, and every platform gives you some data. It gives you the some stats. So I'm going to go ahead into this is for In-Ear Insights, the Trust Insights podcast. And you'll notice here you get things like the number of all-time downloads, last 7 days, last 30 days this year, downloads by episode and all that stuff. One thing that's interesting is depending on the platform you're on, it will give you different metrics. So one thing Libsyn does, for example, is they have the ability to switch between unique downloads and IAB certified downloads. And the big differentiator there is IAB disqualifies any kind of mechanical download. So if a server caches your audio content or CDN interacts with IAB does not count that, whereas Libsyn does. And IAB somehow, and I don't know how they do this, but somehow certifies that at least 1 minute of the data was listened to, was consumed. So, which again, I'm not sure how they measured that.
Yeah, if it was a partial download and they're turning it down, that would make sense. But I don't know. The only other one would be if they're only allowing stuff from certain players, if there's stats that they're getting from certain players. But that's all a little sketchy. And then the other thing that, I don't know, that automated downloads thing, I understand, okay, they don't want bots grabbing it. But if it's something that's getting cached, it could be getting cached and then listened to 15 or 20 times. And because we always hear stories about what does Apple cache and not cache. And yeah, I mean, if I was Apple, I'd be like, yeah, I want to cache all this stuff and serve this because it's ridiculous to have people running around and maybe risking downloads, whereas I could have all the stats and all the traffic. So yeah, it's there's a lot of voodoo in there still.
There is. And if you look at the difference here, if I toggle back and forth, we have all time 28,000 IAB downloads. If I switch back to unique, it is almost double that, right? So there's a big gap between these two.
Yeah, no, I've noticed the same thing on every other show that we've done and been involved with, is that the IAB number is low. Now, on the other side of the fence, if advertisers are all just like, yes, okay, we will live and die by IAB numbers, well, then that is something, because then every time a sponsor comes on board, you don't have to do this dance of like, well, where are your stats coming from? What are those? What is included? What's not included? And, you can just be like, hey, they're IAB. Let's move on to the next thing. So that is worth something. But yeah, the fact that it makes it look like your show is not doing what it used to be doing too, that's disappointing.
It is. So that's your basic podcast stats. The next thing you'll want to look at, of course, is your channel analytics. So, for example, Trust Insights, we need a party sound of some kind because we just crossed 1,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel.
Oh, nice. YouTube. That's huge.
Exactly. And so we obviously push out a lot of our content, like this episode, onto YouTube. Our podcast is on YouTube as well. And so you can go through and slice and dice and look at the most popular content, the number of subscribers you're getting, all those things. That is all within the YouTube interface. The one thing that I will say is that it is tricky trying to develop a cohesive picture of all this, because all these systems are different. So one of the things you're going to want to do is you'll want to go into each of the systems and start doing things like, downloads, and just starting to export all of your data in a single format. So let's do like last 90 days into CSV. Then we go into YouTube, go into our content here, views by content. And then for, again, last 90 days. And you can download here into a CSV file. And one of the things you'll probably want to do is go looking at our chart of metrics, maybe put together a single spreadsheet that incorporates, podcast downloads, unique downloads, IAB downloads, YouTube views per day and stuff, so that you have it all in one place.
Yeah, that's a great way to, you've got kind of a real dashboard, and it's always interesting to see when things go up in one channel and down in another, trying to figure out what's going on there. That can really give you some ideas as to where the best place to put your effort is.
Exactly. For your stuff when it comes to social media, again, the tools to use there, if you're not already using some kind of social listing system, you probably should be. So for example, Agorapulse is the system that we currently use. We'll go into the analytics system here for audience. I can look at the different services, the different networks, and take a look at the audience. Let's see. for 5-year Twitter profiles. Okay, I'll have to talk to them about this later. But you can see with Instagram, for example, I can see how many followers, how is that audience growing over time. This is again where you have the export button there to export your CSV files, but social audiences is a very straightforward way to measure. Okay, how are things performing?
Yeah, it's interesting too. I know Agorapulse and a bunch of other tools are having issues with Twitter data as the API changes. And it's the same thing with the weirdness over at Reddit too, with them not allowing API calls. There's a lot of movement in the space, but yeah, that's usually a great place. It's wonderful if you can just jump in on one interface and answer 5 or 6 different channels.
Exactly. Organic searches. Again, if you are not familiar with Google Search Console, you would probably want to go to search.google.com, which is the Search Console thing. A quick and shameless plug. If you have not already enrolled in the Trust Insights Search Console course, you probably should go and do that, because that will teach you all sorts of stuff about Search Console effectively, in a whole gazillion different ways. Let's go ahead and pop into Marketing Over Coffee's Search Console. The thing that we're looking for here is going to go into search results, and we want to see things like this. We want to see the people who are searching for Marketing Over Coffee. Let's flip this to, let's do the last 16 months just to get a sort of a bird's eye view. And you can see we're holding pretty steady state. Here within Search Console. This allows us though to measure our brand strength, right? How many people are searching for Marketing Over Coffee? And you'll notice that there are variations. So Marketing Over Coffee podcast, and so on and so forth. So anything which is a brand name, you'd want to use the built-in features to combine these queries into one, so you can get a pretty clear, easy to understand map of exactly how many clicks you're getting and how many impressions. For measuring your podcast, the number I would suggest that you use is impressions. And the reason I would say you should use impressions is because that's based on the number of times Google shows your site as one of the answers to the searcher's intent. And that's a good metric for volume, for the number of just raw number of people. How many people are searching for this thing? So I'll just turn off clicks here, and you can see at middle of last year, something really changed, and we were doing like really, really well. And then, sort of back to normal after that.
Yeah, that is really weird. I have to dig back into the last year, July, and see what those shows were, or what was going on there. That's
exactly
interesting. Yeah, this is the classic thing of it's just opening more questions as we dig.
For your inbound pitches, that is going to be handled within your website software. However it is you do this, I would recommend having some kind of contact form on your website as opposed to just a straight email address, because straight email addresses are really easy to spam. If we go to marketingovercoffee.com as an example, there is a talk to us where you can contact us, and obviously we get a lot of inquiries on this page.
Always moving, yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing that might help is at least putting on a drop down of what the reference is. So if it's someone looking specifically for sponsorship versus a guest, that would certainly help disambiguate that. But you can, of course, just do that with natural language processing as well. The next thing you're going to want to do, what's on your mind, John?
Well, I was just, looking at, it's always, there's always stuff with the contact form. You're like, oh, that should really, just like you said, like a better drop down would be good. And throwing a capture in there to get some more of the garbage out of there would be good. But, it's a never ending battle. And I've kind of just taken for granted that PR folks already have us on their decision lists and all the other lists. Like they don't even come through the contact form. They just have our email and spam us. So.
Exactly. The next steps in terms of metrics are ones that are going to be based on your business, right? So a big chunk of them is going to be things like Google Analytics. If you're using Google Analytics with your website, you absolutely should be doing some correlation analysis. One of the reasons we're saying put all of your data into a single big spreadsheet is that you can take things like your Google Analytics for conversions, or your marketing automation systems lead scores, or just raw numbers of leads, and start doing correlation to say, okay, maybe we care about marketing qualified leads as a company, and we want to see what is the correlation of these podcast metrics to that outcome. And if there is a statistical relationship, because if there is a statistical relationship, you can then test it. But if there's no correlation at all between number of podcast downloads and the number of lead form inquiries, then podcasts might not be having quite the impact that we want. Okay. And then other stuff is your sales CRM numbers, your outcome, your KPIs, whatever the KPIs were that you sat down at the very beginning of this process and said, this is what I care about. So how do you, when you go to process our data for Marketing Over Coffee, John, how do you process it? How do you, do you have a dashboard? Do you have a spreadsheet? What do you use to track?
Yeah, we've got HubSpot running, that makes it easier for me to manage all of the folks. Because the big thing is, they come in through the front door and we usually meet them, but there is a repeatable cycle of, people that haven't advertised in a year and a half or 2 years. I want to go back and talk to those people again and find out what's going on. Do they want to get on and do that? And so, yeah, HubSpot is it's the right entry point for us because we don't have a ton of contacts in there. There's like 2,000 contacts in there or whatever. And so it's the same way I do it with Trust Insights. You have a deal board to keep track of active conversations and people that may be doing something. And then after that, it's because, it's closed deals that ultimately move the thing. So it's, when it gets passed over to accounting, that's the other set of metrics that you want to keep track of as far as revenue per quarter. And, and then that, unfortunately, it's still like totally Wild West, right? Like every quarter I'm looking at, okay, how many episodes are left? How many weeks do we have left to sell those? What kind of rates are we going to charge on it? And, like right now, if somebody wants to buy Q3, they're paying rack rate or there's nothing available even because, July, August is already gone. But, if you had come to me, January or December 31st of 2022, the crazy fire sale would be on and you'd be able to buy a month or two for what you'd now pay for a week. So it's always moving based on the demand.
And then from a marketing perspective, what do you measure to measure the popularity of the show itself?
Yeah, it's been downloads. I should be doing more with Search Console. I'm glad that you saw that because that immediately made me dig into. I'm like, okay, what was July? We had said, okay, so Chris was in Montenegro. We had Seth Godin and Debbie Millman, who are both huge and have huge followings. And yeah, I should be doing more on that front instead of just looking, because I'm looking at the raw downloads and the other one is like tweaking that with paid and organic shares, because I'm always pushing on every social front. And then every once in a while, I'll throw money against specific shows that I know can do. Like I should really go back and see how much money did I spend on ads for that July, August period, because it would not surprise me if, and yeah, that's kind of like an inside tip. Like just, it's so simple to go into LinkedIn and say, okay, we've got an interview with Seth Godin or Debbie Millman and advertise against Debbie Millman fans. And I'm going to get in front of like 5,000 people that I know already love Debbie. And so that's pretty much a slam dunk for getting downloads generated there. But yeah, it's always the cobbler's kids have bloody stumps, right? I should be spending more time digging into what's really working there. And just, there's only so many hours in the day.
Do you know of, or do people do NPS scores for podcasts?
No, I've never seen anybody go that far. I think a lot of people hang their hat on ratings. They're just looking for, and like it's not as big a deal for the smaller shows like mine. Like as long as we've got enough of an audience that advertisers are interested, that's great. But I think if you were at the, Joe Rogan or name your celebrity who's getting 1 million downloads a month, NPS would be probably huge to get a feel for how the show's doing. And I don't think the cement has set as far as format too for a lot of these shows. I think it would be really interesting to see like, okay, should it be an hour or 3 hours, and should it be one guest, or should they have like 4 guests over 3 hours? Like there's a lot of levers to pull as far as what people want as far as content. And it doesn't help that it ends up being so time shifted. But yeah, I don't know. That is an interesting idea for NPS. I think if you've got enough of an audience where you can guarantee yourself 1,000 responses to a survey, it's definitely worth doing.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar, NPS scoring works basically like this. This is an example that runs in the Trust Insights newsletter every month. At the beginning of every month, we ask a simple question: how likely are you to recommend Trust Insights as a consulting firm to someone in the next 90 days? Likely, neither likely nor unlikely, or unlikely. And when you click through on one of these results, the click through sends you to the Trust Insights website. And what we're doing is we're actually logging the anonymous URL data. Right? You can see right there, the NPS poll is right in the URL. And then there's Mocha, which is Katie's dog. And then after that, that data goes into Google Analytics 4 because it's just a page URL. And then we can run an analysis of that from Google Analytics data and say, okay, well, this is what our NPS score looks like. If it's above the green line, things are great. If it's below the red line, we're having some issues that we need to be tackling. But this is something that any podcaster could implement because it's not super complicated. It's just different page views, different clicks will send you to the same page, but with a different URL parameter in the URL. And then you can track those page views as separate pages and say, okay, well, this is how many people clicked on this versus this. And if you recall, with NPS scores, the mathematical formula is the number of promoters minus the number of detractors, the percentage of promoters versus percentage of detractors. So if you have this question here, if I go back to our survey, it is neither likely or unlikely is the category you ignore, right? These are the people who are neither good nor bad. And you want to, what's the percentage of people who are likely to recommend minus the percentage of people who are unlikely to recommend. And that tells you how you're doing.
Yeah, so really, you've got like it's either +1 or -1, and you're watching the spread there. So that's interesting to get a quarter where, and it's funny to dig in further, like what happened on that one month where there were more angry people than happy people. Like you would expect it always to be like 0.6, 0.7 ish, but of course, depends on the month.
Yep. And because this is tied to your email list, if you go into your email marketing system, you can look at the people who clicked on each individual one. You could put together a list of, maybe 5 people who clicked on unlikely and, individually email them, survey them, say, hey, what's going on? Did we do something wrong? Do you just not like the show? Like, are you not a Seth Godin fan? Why did you say you don't want to listen to the podcast this month?
Yeah, and well, it could be huge too. You once you drill through and see who they are, you check your CRM notes, you may know exactly what's going on already. You're like, oh yeah, they were the one that we didn't mean to burn that building down, but it just happened.
So that feedback is essential, and getting feedback as a way to measure your podcast is super important. Informally and formally. How does the text line perform for us in terms of feedback?
The text line, yeah, we're kind of reaching a point where I want to decide what to do it. It's not been huge because really there's under 100 subscribers on that list. It's not a giant list at all. It does get fantastic engagement. Anytime I send out a text, I'll get, 3 to 10 responses from people. And of course, it's a classic one too of like what people want. If I send a couple updates or a link about a show, I don't hear anything. If I'm giving away an $80 set of headphones, suddenly I'm getting 80%, click through on that and responses. So it is the fastest and most direct way to get in front of people. There's no doubt about that. It is the best channel to do. I think I need to do some SaaS work on that because I think I'm probably paying $60 a month to hit these 100 people unlimited.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is way too expensive because I bought it 3 or 4 years ago when it was kind of new, and now there's like 5 different vendors. So I think this is one of those things where if I just say, look, take a look at my list, you can see my usage, cut my price in half, and I won't go anywhere for another year, that kind of thing. I probably can get that deal. It's just a matter of, again, another thing that I should be working on. It's like I've got more to squeeze out of the email list than the text line, but yeah, overall, the text line has been good. It is a great source of engagement. Like I said, I've pretty much made that the lead choice. And, that's one thing that I've been trying on the show to drive is to keep pushing this message of, hey, sign up for the text line because that's where I give away this stuff first to see if I can get more people to convert. And it seems to have plateaued. I haven't been able to get people over the hump for some reason because we've kind of got the diehard fans and haven't been able to add to that. So I'm not too sure where I should go next with that. I definitely am not going to buy and start spamming people via text. That's just absolute horrible behavior. So I'm not going that route. But yeah, I don't know. I even too. Have you any ideas on your side as far as is there something else that we could try with that, or some way to get that, to get a little more action?
See, for me, I would say park it and invest all our time in the email list. But that's my bias, because email is the medium I know best. It's the one I know all the best practices for.
Yeah, and that is a great point. In that I need to be doing more consistent cadence on the email newsletter is always the thing that falls off the bottom of the list. It's like, well, I need to work on sponsors for the quarter. I need to line up, make sure that the shows are great. Like that's always the number one concern. And so email falls to the bottom of the list. And I think if I had a more predictable cadence to the email, I think it would probably see faster results. And then of course the irony of that too is it wouldn't surprise me if the email list accelerates, if that then drives more traffic to the text line also. That wouldn't surprise me.
Exactly. I mean, there's stuff there, and this probably, this could have gone in last week's show, but I've been experimenting with OpenAI's Whisper transcription technology, which is an open source model that you can run on your laptop. It will occupy your laptop's processors for a little while, but if you are used to using transcription, but or what transcription is, AI-based transcription, but maybe you're on a plan that only has like 100 minutes a month or something like that, you can download the software, run on your laptop, and run it as much as your laptop can manage without choking to death. That you can run on it. And in the case of a show like Marketing Over Coffee, where we have 700 episodes, it is somewhat cost prohibitive to put 700 episodes through a transcription service, but I could download all 700 MP3s, put them through the service locally, the open model, and then push those transcripts back up onto the website for SEO purposes to get those keywords. And if we wanted to convert them into audiograms for YouTube, that would have the closed captions files all set there. So that's if I wanted to invest time in the show, that would be the approach I would take, because then those transcripts, you feed that to something like a Chat GPT, and it makes you a 1-paragraph summary that goes in your newsletter. And that's how I got into the whole newsletter thing. Is if you're sitting there writing the newsletter, like, oh, what have I got to write this week? Well, you take the last 3 shows, their transcripts, you put them through Chat GPT and say, okay, write me a 1-paragraph summary of each show. Boom, boom, boom. Now people know what's in the last 3 episodes and they can tune into them.
Yeah, because that's always even been a challenge for me as I'm writing the newsletter. I'm like, well, do I just want to have links to the last 4 shows for the month? Like that seems like it's just plugging the shows where there's other content. And so, yeah, right now I'm doing a cadence of 2 shows from the month. And then I usually have, there's usually 3 to 5 other links that are kind of show related, but stuff you can only get in that newsletter to make that unique. But yeah, I should probably do some testing as far as, do we just do show summaries? Like, is that good enough? The email doesn't need to be a freestanding piece of content. And maybe I'm actually, hamstringing ourselves by doing that. Like all that stuff should be in every audio show. I don't know.
Yeah. So there's plenty of different ways to I would say, for building that stuff up for your podcast metrics, for measuring the effectiveness of the marketing of the show. How do you know when it's time to make a change? When you're looking at your numbers, like downloads and things, how do you know it's like, we got to do something? The numbers are going in the wrong direction. What tells you that, and when do you know that?
Yeah, that's a good. I've never really hit that point. I mean, we've seen cyclical stuff, but I've never had any point where I'm like, okay, it's been, this is a down year. Like that has not happened. It's still the organic growth of, in a bad year, 5% still happens. I think in a lot of the stuff that Tom Webster talks about, shows that like the market still has not matured. Like you have Gen X people who are living and dying by podcasts, and it's still there. So yeah, really, I've always just fallen back on the challenges, just like always going for bigger and better guests. That's the biggest thing, because they have their own audiences. And so you're getting that additive effect of, okay, you're finding, people who read that book that are marketing tech fans that want to, have some of what we want to have. So yeah, I've never had any, structural, and as you know, we've been doing it for like 15 years, and really the format has not changed at all. Like we have, you could go back and listen to a show from 10 years ago, and it's really no different than what we're doing now. And yeah, I guess part of it too is that the career we've chosen has just been an absolute meat grinder, of insanity for 10 years. And with the rate of tech, it's only going to get worse. So there's just never any shortage of stuff to, for people to talk about. I guess the analogy would be like we're the Weather Channel and the hurricanes keep getting worse, like people are always tuning in because they're like, oh my God, what's coming next? What do I need to know? And so it has its own audience built in, thankfully. I guess so. If I saw somebody and they were losing like even 10% over a 6-month period, you get that down to the right thing. I think the easiest way to go would be like find 10 listeners that are fans and ask them what what they think about and where it needs to go. And I think even finding people that are podcast fans and listen to a lot of stuff, somebody like a Tom Webster, and have them listen to your show and give you feedback as far as what do you think needs to be changed and what's wrong with the format? Like, why is this not grabbing? Because there's a couple different levers. I think the biggest one would be always make sure that you've got quality content for every week. It doesn't work to put out a bad show every third or fourth show because there's just too many other great podcasts that never miss, and listeners sooner or later, are going to clean up their queue. And if you're the one that misses that chair when the music stops, you're out of luck.
Exactly. Yeah. I listen to folks like Andrew Huberman over Huberman Lab. His podcast episodes are like 3 hours long. But they're so filled with valuable information that you're like, you know what? I'm just going to, this is going to be the show I listen to for like the next 3 workouts because I just want to get through and hear everything he has to say about X. So you're right. If the content is good, and this is generally true, if the content is good, there is no such thing as attention span, right? People will consume as much content as possible that is of any length, as long as they're getting benefit from it. It's when that doesn't benefit them anymore that attention span becomes an issue because there's always something better.
Yeah, there's always alternatives. And so Andrew Huberman, does he release monthly or weekly, or what's his cadence with
weekly?
Weekly with 3 hours. So he's doing like, that's crazy. That is like even NPR actually doesn't do that. Like that was one thing that was amazing to me because I was always like, God, these NPR, they like kill it every single week. And then you find out that, well, they actually sit down and they start with a dozen shows and only 3 of them see the light of day. Like they will, as they're going through and, they'll spend 3 weeks working on a show and then just be like, yeah, this doesn't have the juice. It vanishes. So, well, yeah, wow, 3 hours weekly. He's definitely putting in the work there. And same deal. If it's a specialized niche and he's the expert there, he's got a lot to talk about.
Exactly. Well, he's a Stanford doctor of neuroscience, and every episode is just about like, hey, here's how you can optimize, this or that part of your health, and something obviously people care about. What's this? It's health, money, and relationships. Those are the 3 things that every fortune teller you ever known will say every inquiry is bucketed into one of those 3 categories predictably. So if you can serve one of those 3 niches, you will do fine.
Yeah, that's from the dawn of time. The tarot card readers know where to touch to make sure that they're getting feedback and getting people excited.
Exactly. So we have covered this gigantic map, which is barely visible in the last 4 weeks, on marketing and launching your podcast, from your overall strategy to your podcast specific strategy to the dozens of techniques for marketing your podcast to today measuring your podcast. You can catch the past episodes. If you missed a previous episode, you can always catch it on our YouTube channel, which is where we have these episodes. And for those folks who want a copy of that ridiculous map, we're going to put the PDF of it in the Analytics for Marketers Slack group. So go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. We will put this newly updated map, which as you may have seen, we're editing it as we're talking. So it is as fresh as you can possibly get.
Yes, always moving. Get the hurricane report. This is it.
Get the hurricane report. Any final thoughts, John, about marketing your podcast, whether it's new show or an existing show? All the stuff we talked about.
Yeah, I'd put out to every, if the series has been interesting to you, definitely go over to the Slack group, join up, because we would love to hear from you as far as what you're doing and what you're trying to do. Because yeah, this is, even though we've been doing this for over 15 years, it's still like making it up as we go. There's always new tools, there's always new ways to do things. And yeah, I mean, think about it. We did a 4-episode series and didn't talk once about microphones. Like, that's got to be a record in the history of podcasting education. Like, because that's like the joke that we always make is like every podcasting 101 or whatever spends like 80% of the time talking about microphones. And you're just like, oh my God, I can't listen to this anymore.
Yeah. Well, I know we agreed early on. We were not talking about how to make the show. Making the show is a totally different set of topics that is outside the purview of marketing your show. Because as with all forms of content marketing, half your time should be spent marketing the content. 90% of your time is spent making the content. It's not going to develop the legs that you want it to have.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. That's a good note to close.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We will see you all next time. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.